Hello, we are at the midpoint of 2024 and some different publications are bringing out lists of books that they're calling the best of the year so far. And I just came across another one on BBC Culture, a group of 12 books that are compiled by journalists Rebecca Lawrence and Lindsay Baker. And they've made some really surprising and interesting choices. So I want to go through each of these books because some of them I have read and I think are great. Some I have read and slightly question more. Some I've been meaning to read, and some that I've never heard of before. So that's why I really enjoy going through lists like this. But I'd love to hear if you have read any of these books and if you agree, or if you're interested in reading any of them now after I describe them, or if there are other books that you want to put forward that you think are absolutely superb and must be read. So, starting off with the new novel by Andrew O'Hagan called Caledonian Road. And this is set in May 2021 in London. It's described as a kind of state of the nations novel where it follows a celebrity writer and academic in his early 50s who has contact and interactions with all different levels of society, from the upper echelons of minor royalty and the mega rich to the criminal underworld, and how sometimes there is a movement between those different levels of society. And so yeah, there's lots of different characters and situations that he gets into in this particular period of time within the city. And I'm so excited to read this. I'm just about to start reading it with my online book club. It's our July selection, and I've been so eager to get to it because I've heard so many great things about it. So I'll put a link below to my online book club if you want to join us, if you're not already a member. And yeah, it would be great to read along because it's quite a long novel, so I'm sure there'll be lots to discuss. My Heavenly Favorite by Lucas Rijneveld, who's an author from the Netherlands, whose debut novel won the International Booker Prize, The Discomfort of Evening. And this is a story set on a farm and follows a older man, a veterinarian, who develops an obsession with a 14-year-old girl. And so it's following this very difficult and dodgy relationship. And personally, I feel like I've read too many novels recently that are kind of about relationships of wildly different ages and are kind of about this Lolita, type situation. And also The Discomfort of Evening, personally, I thought the novel was interesting, but there were some choices made in it and some aspects of it which I really questioned. So the author's writing is quite dark and disturbing and really probes at a lot of these uncomfortable questions, which normally I really enjoy literature that does that. But yeah, my experience of Discomfort of Evening wasn't all that positive. So I haven't been too keen to get to this book, but if you've read it, I'd love to hear what you think. Green Dot by Madeleine Gray. This is a novel told from the point of view of a very snarky 24-year-old young woman who's a bit adrift in her life. She gets a job at a news outlet where she falls for a journalist that is, you guessed it, much older than her. So it's looking at the disparity between these two very different characters and their messy relationship. And I don't know, just after reading Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck, I just sort of feel like I'm not all that interested in reading about relationships of characters of very different ages. Although this novel is also supposed to be a lot about modern life and has been likened to Meg Mason's novel Sorrow and Bliss, which which does make me really want to read it. The Sleepwalkers by Scarlett Thomas. This is a novel about a couple who have just married and go to stay for their honeymoon at a luxury resort on a Greek island, but they have been keeping secrets from each other, and it's told with the momentum of a kind of thriller. It's been likened to Patricia Highsmith, and it uses different forms to tell the story of documents and letters and notes, and I think that sounds really intriguing. Scarlett Thomas has also published a number of really interesting sounding novels, and I've always meant to read her, so this might be a good place to start. Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. This is a novel set in Ireland following a sweet-natured teenage boy who is kidnapped by a local gang because of things that his older brother has done. So it's following this very dramatic story. The dialogue is meant to be very evocative and sharp, and I have heard such good things about this novel. I have read Colin Barrett's debut short story collection called Young Skins, which was excellent, although I think one of the weakest stories in that was one of the longer stories, which also followed a kind of like gang violence. So if this novel is kind of more like that, I'm not sure if I'll be that interested, but his writing is so good that I do definitely want to get a copy of this. Change by Édouard Louis. This is a novel very much in a group of autobiographical fiction that the author has been publishing for a number of years, charting his movement as a young gay man moving from a working class background to a educated middle class and upper class levels of society. And I absolutely loved his debut novel, The End of Eddie. But then I read another book of his called Who Killed My Father, which had some interesting parts to it, but I felt was like recycling a lot of his same experiences, and so I'm not sure whether I will enjoy this new novel or not, which I think very much follows him as he becomes much more educated and is moving in kind of intellectual societies in France and Paris. But yeah, I would like to give it a try because I have heard great things about it. Parasol Against the Axe by Helen Oyeyemi. This is a really curious novel that I have read, and it's difficult to describe it, or at least the way I summarize it doesn't really contain what this book is about, because it follows a woman who joins in a hen party to Prague, and the different experiences of these women in the city, the encounters that they have, but also how they have a lot of personal history and history with each other, which they kind of go over. But it is also about so much more than that, because it begins with the city of Prague itself as having kind of a consciousness and being trolled online and following that. So it is like a depiction of the city in a much larger and interesting way. But Helen Oyeyemi doesn't use conventional kind of narratives. So if you're looking for like a straightforward story or plot, you won't get it in this book. But there are so many surprising and interesting things about it. Like some of my favorite parts was there's a bookshop which doesn't accept currency, just books are exchanged for other books. And also there's this curious text which is shape-shifting and doesn't have a fixed form. It feels very much like Helen Oyeyemi's writing itself. So this isn't a novel that I would readily recommend to like a wide group of readers, but if you're interested in really experimental and really different kinds of fiction, you could kind of liken her to Ali Smith, then yeah, I'd definitely recommend trying this book. Choice by Neel Mukherjee. This is a novel that has 3 different strands of a publisher who makes a very daring choice, a academic whose life is really affected when a stranger comes into her life, and following a working class family in rural India whose lives are really affected by the choices which are made elsewhere in the world. And though it's described as a novel, I have heard discovered that these, three different strands are kind of distinct different stories, although they touch upon one another. But it's really looking at how the decisions we make in our personal life have larger effects in the wider world. And I think that sounds so interesting. And I've loved reading Neel Mukherjee's fiction in the past. He's such like an insightful and evocative and really vibrant writer. So yeah, I am looking forward to reading this book. Also, this comes with a heap of praise from a whole group of different authors that I really respect, and including an author who is a judge on an upcoming book prize. So this is a title which might appear on a book prize list very soon. Victim by Andrew Boryga. This is a novel about a young man who comes from very difficult and tragic circumstances, and that his father was murdered, his mother is single and really struggling, and his best friend is an imprisoned gang member, but he has learned that he can capitalize on his own tragic story by amplifying his victimhood, because these are the kinds of stories that readers want to read about. So it's really interrogating this whole culture and reading and literature in general, which sounds really fascinating. And I hadn't heard of this book before, so I'm now really keen to read it. Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh. This is a novel about a young gay man in Nigeria, and it's his coming-of-age story as he forms a relationship with another young man, which his father discovers, and so sends his son away to a Christian boarding school. And the narrative moves between the son's account and his mother's account in her perspective on events, and follows a period in Nigerian history from the end of a war to more recent times, and homophobic laws that are being passed. So I've heard mention of this novel a few times before, and I've just never got a copy of it, but I really need to rectify that because I think this story sounds fantastic. James by Percival Everett, a novel that's been already been much celebrated and talked about, and deservedly so, taking the character of Jim from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and following his perspective and how it gets into the emotion of his life and the moment-to-moment fear and terror as he goes on this journey down the Mississippi, but also his love of reading and language, and his real desperation to write and to tell his own story. The way it follows the formation of his identity is so tremendous, and I absolutely loved this book. And finally, there is Worry by Alexandra Tanner, which is a novel following a 28-year-old woman who moves to Brooklyn and starts a life for herself there, and her struggles in the city, but also how she's obsessed with scrolling online and following influencers. But her younger sister comes to stay with her too. So it's about their relationship and about modern life in this way. And it sounds interesting, but probably a book that I won't get to anytime soon, unless you've read it and think it's absolutely fantastic. So if you have, let me know in the comments below what you think of it and about all of these other books that I've been discussing. I'd love to hear if you've read them or if you're interested in reading them now, or if you have any other suggestions of books you've read this year that you really suggest that I get to. I'd love to hear about that. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.